Hey guys, tonight we take a journey back in time to the early 1600s. Picture this. You're standing on the bustling streets of England, surrounded by the chatter of a rapidly changing world. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and you feel a sort of heavy pressure on your shoulders. The tension between strict religious rules and the desire for personal freedom is thick. Life here is far from easy and you're a pilgrim. You've heard whispers of a place across the ocean where you can freely practice your faith and live according to your beliefs. But this dream is no simple matter. It involves a perilous journey, a new start, and a host of unknowns. Imagine the mix of excitement and fear that fills you as you prepare to board the Mayflower, the ship that will carry you toward an uncertain future. But before we go further, let me just say, you probably won't survive this journey. No, seriously, the risks are enormous. We're talking about a trip that will take months, in a time when crossing the Atlantic was a dangerous gamble. But hey, if you're still up for it, let's dive in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I'm curious. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're about to board the Mayflower, but before you even set foot on the ship, you're already faced with one challenge: the journey itself. You're not leaving because you want to explore, you're leaving because, back in England, the Puritans are cracking down on religious freedom. So, in the dead of winter, you and your fellow pilgrims, about 100 in total, gather in the port of Plymouth. But there's a twist: you won't be setting sail alone. You see, the Pilgrims initially planned on boarding two ships, the Mayflower and the Speedwell. The Speedwell was the smaller of the two and meant to serve as a backup, in case the Mayflower was damaged on the journey. But as you're about to find out, not everything goes as planned. Historians still argue whether the Speedwell was truly unseaworthy, or if it was just the Pilgrims trying to save a little extra money by cutting corners. Either way, after a few leaks, the Speedwell was deemed unusable, and everyone had to crowd aboard the Mayflower. Now, picture yourself cramped in that ship, a wooden vessel that can barely fit 100 people, with provisions for months. You're on a ship built for trading, not comfort. It's stuffy, smelly, and you're surrounded by strangers, except they don't feel like strangers anymore. They're your family, your fellow dreamers. In this small, cold space, everyone huddles together, trying to find any scrap of warmth they can. Now that you've settled aboard the Mayflower, you begin to realize just how uncomfortable the next few months are going to be. The weather is cold, the wind bitter, and the idea of spending weeks on a ship that barely seems fit to make it across the channel is not exactly reassuring. You might be wondering what's really going to happen. Well, brace yourself. This journey isn't about some dramatic escape or peaceful passage. It's about survival. The Atlantic crossing in 1620 isn't just some quiet cruise. It's an endurance test, and you, dear pilgrim, are at the center of it. But first, let's talk about the ship, specifically the Speedwell, which was supposed to be your trusty second vessel, remember? It was supposed to be a safety net in case the Mayflower encountered issues. But instead of giving you more room to breathe, the Speedwell became the first problem of the trip. Historians still argue whether it was truly unfit for the journey, or if it was simply a case of shoddy craftsmanship. Some believe it was nothing more than a badly built ship that was doomed to fail. Others argue it was just a bad omen that added to the Pilgrims' mounting frustrations. Whatever the cause, you're now stuck with just the Mayflower. The Mayflower, on the other hand, is much sturdier than the Speedwell, but it's still no luxury liner. It's a cargo ship, not a passenger vessel, and its design wasn't made with comfort in mind. For the next few weeks, you'll find yourself spending long days and even longer nights below deck, cramped into a space not meant for sleeping, let alone living. You'll hear the creaks and groans of the ship as it sails, and the salty air will sting your face every time you venture out for a breath. Inside, it's even worse. Your stomach churns as the waves crash against the sides, and the smell of damp wood, wet clothing, and crowded bodies fills the air. Even though the Mayflower has been outfitted with extra supplies, there's little room to move, and it's too cold to get comfortable. The ship's lower decks aren't just cramped, they're unsanitary. Think about it, no modern toilets, no showers, and precious little ventilation. You're living in the worst conditions imaginable. There's no such thing as privacy, and when the stormy seas hit, everyone's seasick. You'll likely spend days lying on the deck, just trying to hold yourself together while the rest of the passengers stagger around doing the same. You hear the occasional groan of frustration as one of the sailors shouts orders, trying to maintain some semblance of order on a ship that seems to be fighting the sea at every turn. Then there's the food, or rather the lack of it. Rations are limited and there's no fresh produce. It's hard to imagine how anyone can survive on salted meat, stale bread, and whatever you can scrape together from the little stores the Mayflower offers. You find yourself wondering how much longer it will take before your body just gives up from exhaustion and hunger. Historians often point out the unimaginable challenge of this voyage. Yes, it was a huge leap of faith, but it was also a test of willpower. With the ship barely able to hold up in rough seas, the Pilgrims, surrounded by months of sailing, sickness, and uncertainty, had to rely on nothing but each other. It's a good thing too, because what awaits on the other side is far from what you imagined. It's the third week aboard the Mayflower, and the sense of isolation is beginning to weigh heavily on you. The days blur together as you trudge through the endless waves of the Atlantic. At times, it feels like the ship is the only thing connecting you to the rest of the world. It's easy to forget the land you left behind, the families you'll never see again, and the uncertain future that waits across the sea. But for now, you're all in it together. Everyone on board, bound by the same hope for religious freedom and the dream of a better life. But let's shift the focus for a moment. You've probably noticed by now that the passengers aren't all just devout pilgrims. Sure, most are seeking a fresh start, but not everyone aboard is there for the same reasons. Alongside the religious zealots, there are merchants, sailors, and even a few adventurers hoping to make their fortune in the New World. Historians still argue whether the Pilgrims' desire for freedom was stronger than their desire for riches. Some say the venture was purely a religious mission, while others claim economic ambitions played a big part. Now back to the packed conditions below deck. What's surprising, or perhaps oddly comforting, is the odd collection of items the Pilgrims brought with them. You know the basics, Bibles of course, but what else? For many of these passengers, the journey isn't just about faith, it's about practicality. You'd expect the essentials: food, clothing, tools. But here's where it gets interesting. Some passengers were smart enough to bring along things that most people wouldn't think to pack. Woolen blankets to ward off the sea chill, gardening tools for when they finally reached land, and even some simple medicines like herbs for colds and a stash of honey to ease the throat. But it wasn't all survival gear. For some, the trip was a form of adventure. Maybe it's a compass, a pocket watch, or even a book or two for those long nights when the waves refuse to let up. Speaking of the unexpected, there's something else you might be surprised to learn. The Pilgrims had a few luxury items too. Among their possessions you'd find delicate porcelain cups, little trinkets from home, and even some fine linen, because after all, who knows how long they'll be away. These bits of normalcy help soften the sharp edge of life on board. They're a reminder of the world they came from, even if that world is fading fast. You might be wondering why they didn't pack more practical things like fresh food. Why not fill the ship with potatoes or other crops they could plant right away? The answer is simple. The Atlantic crossing wasn't just a journey to a new land, it was a journey into the unknown. The Pilgrims weren't sure exactly what they would find, so they packed things that were familiar, things they could take comfort in. It wasn't just about surviving the journey, it was about preserving the little bit of home they could carry with them. So, you can imagine that as the days drag on, these little comforts become essential. The soft flutter of a book's pages or the warmth of your woolen blanket can help you forget the miserable reality of life aboard the ship. Maybe, just maybe, they're keeping you sane. You've been aboard the Mayflower for what feels like forever, but in reality, it's only been a month. You can hear the constant creaking of the ship as it groans against the waves, the timber straining as if the vessel itself is fighting to stay afloat. The ocean stretches out in every direction, the sky often clouded and gray, leaving you to wonder whether you'll ever see land again. It's cold, damp, and endless. The weather is relentlessly harsh, and the sea doesn't seem to care about your journey or your dreams. For a while, your daily routine revolves around survival, staying warm, trying to get enough food, and avoiding seasickness. And the sickness? Well, it's taking its toll. You're not alone in feeling nauseous and drained, because seasickness is spreading like wildfire below deck. As the days drag on, you find it harder to remember what it feels like to walk on solid ground, and the gentle sway of the ship has become the constant rhythm of your life. In fact, some historians argue that seasickness wasn't just a minor inconvenience for the Pilgrims, it may have been a real source of distress, especially for the children and elderly. It's not just the sickness that's weighing you down, it's the boredom. The days on the Mayflower stretch out into an endless loop of monotony. The ship is overcrowded and the air is stifling. You've long since given up on trying to find a quiet corner of the ship. With nothing to do but wait, you begin to notice things you wouldn't have otherwise. How the salt in the air clings to your skin, how your clothes feel heavy and damp, how the faces of your fellow travelers are becoming more and more like ghosts. The same people you boarded with now seem like strangers, their personalities fading into the background as the days drag on. You begin to lose track of time. The weeks are merging into one unremarkable blur, and soon you realize that you've lost count of how long you've been out at sea. You catch yourself wondering whether you'll ever reach your destination. But then, every once in a while, someone speaks up, usually one of the sailors or the more optimistic passengers, and reminds everyone that the land is out there somewhere, hidden beneath the misty horizon. But just when you start to think you're losing hope, something changes. The air starts to feel a little different, a little warmer. The wind shifts. You're still a long way from land, but there's a new energy in the air. It's as though the ship is picking up speed, straining to reach the shore. The Pilgrims are beginning to feel the stirrings of something they hadn't dared to dream of for weeks: the promise of land. Historians still debate how long the Pilgrims actually spent crossing the Atlantic. Some say it took about 2 months, others believe it was closer to 3. But one thing is certain: after the initial panic, the hardships, and the unbearable uncertainty, the Pilgrims were beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel, figuratively speaking, of course. For now, though, all you can do is watch the horizon and hope. The thought of land becomes more and more real with each passing day. Still, you know there are challenges ahead. The first winter in the new world, the uncertainty of what you'll find when you land, and the question of whether you'll even survive once you arrive. But for now, as you look out at the endless blue, there's something soothing about knowing you're getting closer. After what feels like an eternity on the sea, the day finally arrives. You're standing on the deck, staring at the ever-distant horizon when someone shouts, "Land ho!" It's barely a whisper at first, lost in the wind. But slowly, as more eyes follow the cry, the whole ship stirs to life. The sails are adjusted and the passengers move with purpose. The long, torturous crossing is almost over, but the first sight of land isn't as dramatic as you might have imagined. It's not a grand revelation. No grand cliffs or towering hills. It's just a faint outline, barely visible in the distance, a shadow on the edge of the world. Still, it's enough to send a thrill through the crowd. The land is out there waiting. What was once a vague dream is now a reality. The Mayflower changes course, the creaking of the ship becoming almost musical in your ears as it heads toward this new world. But it's not just the thought of dry land that excites you. It's the thought of what's ahead, the chance to begin again, to rebuild life from scratch. The trip across the Atlantic, while harrowing, has taught you a lot about the people on board. You've learned to rely on each other in ways you never imagined. The suffering, the small kindnesses, and the long nights talking about what could lie ahead have made you feel as though you've become part of something much bigger than just yourself. The Mayflower, for all its discomfort, has been your temporary home, and the passengers are now your family. Strangers no longer, they are your comrades, the ones who shared in the endless wait, the sickness and the fear. Yet, as the ship draws closer to the shore, a new wave of anxiety hits. Historians often point out that the Pilgrims didn't land where they expected. This wasn't the spot they had originally set their sights on. They were supposed to land in the mouth of the Hudson River, but winds and navigational errors led them to a different coastline, one far more isolated. The area they eventually chose to settle in wasn't what they'd hoped for. The land was cold, rocky, and treacherous, a far cry from the fertile soils they'd envisioned. It wasn't an ideal place to start over, but it was all they had. As you stand there on deck, watching the coast slowly draw nearer, a realization begins to settle in. The journey isn't over, it's only just beginning. Landing in the new world means facing everything that comes with it. Survival, the unknown, and the need to make this land your home. You'll have to plant crops, build shelter, and figure out how to navigate the harsh environment. But despite the uncertainty, you feel a spark of hope. This land, no matter how daunting, is yours to claim. You're here and you've made it this far. Now all you have to do is step foot on the soil and everything will change. The Mayflower's anchor drops into the chilly waters, the chain rattling as the ship slows, almost as if it too is taking a deep breath. The entire ship falls silent for a moment. You can hear the distant sound of waves lapping against the hull, and for the first time in months, it feels as though the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. There's a mixture of relief and uncertainty hanging in the air. The shores of Plymouth stand before you, rugged and wild, but they hold the promise of a new beginning. As the ship comes to a stop, the Pilgrims, your fellow passengers, are already preparing to disembark. You don't rush though. This is no celebratory moment. There's no confetti or fanfare. You step onto the land slowly, cautiously, as if testing the ground beneath your feet. The soil is cold and unfamiliar, and the air is crisp. You notice how the scent of the sea lingers in the breeze, mixing with the earthiness of the land that's so foreign to you. The trees, sparse and twisted, stand stark against the sky, their branches reaching out like fingers, offering both a welcome and a warning. Historians still argue over the exact nature of the Pilgrims' first impression of Plymouth. Some believe the land was even more desolate than it looked, while others argue it was exactly what they needed, a challenge to overcome. What no one disputes, however, is the fact that the Pilgrims landed with nothing but hope and determination, facing the daunting reality of starting from scratch in a place that had been untouched by civilization for centuries. Once you and the others have disembarked, you take a few steps further inland. The cold winds bite at your face and the ground feels uneven beneath your feet, but there's something undeniably exciting about it. You've made it. The only thing left to do now is survive. You look around, and you can almost hear the rustling of leaves as if the land itself is whispering to you. It's a whisper full of potential, full of promise, but also full of peril. The next step is finding a place to settle. And here's where it gets tricky. Plymouth isn't exactly ideal for farming. It's rocky, the soil isn't rich, and the weather is harsh. But the Pilgrims have no choice but to make the best of what they have. The sense of community is the glue that holds them together now more than ever. You can already hear the discussions taking place between the leaders, trying to figure out where to build their homes and how to plant crops in this unfamiliar soil. You realize too that this is where the real test begins. Finding a way to make this land your home, to survive and thrive in the harsh conditions of a new world. And speaking of survival, there's one thing that's absolutely crucial: food. The first months are going to be rough. The Pilgrims know they'll need to plant, but it's the wrong time of year to begin serious farming. Still, they're not about to give up. Every single person on board the Mayflower is now thinking about how to manage their limited resources. The stores you packed on the ship will only last so long, and every day becomes a fight against the elements, the hunger, and the unknowns of this new environment. As you settle in for the night, you can't help but reflect on what brought you here. You left behind a familiar world for this, and while it feels strange, you're not looking back. The next few days, weeks, and months will test you in ways you never expected. You're not just trying to survive anymore. You're building something from scratch, and in the quiet moments when you look around at the small group of people around you, you realize that the Mayflower was more than just a ship. It was your first step toward freedom, your first step toward making this strange land your own. The days blur together as you and the other pilgrims begin the monumental task of settling in. The excitement from earlier has faded into a sense of grim determination. The harshness of Plymouth's land becomes all too apparent. There's little warmth in the air, and the rocky terrain makes building a shelter even more difficult. You can see the weariness on everyone's faces, and the reality sets in. This isn't just a new beginning. It's going to take everything you have to survive here. The first weeks are spent trying to establish a foothold. Tents are pitched, crude structures begin to take shape, and you all work together, the sense of community stronger than ever before. Yet, despite the shared labor, you feel an underlying tension. The weather is getting colder, and the rations from the Mayflower are dwindling faster than anyone anticipated. It's hard to imagine how you'll make it through the winter when there's barely enough food to keep you going from day to day. But even with the weight of the situation pressing down on you, there are moments of levity. The first New Year's Eve in Plymouth, away from the comforts of home, isn't the grand celebration the Pilgrims had once envisioned. Instead of the hearty feasts and fireworks, you make do with what you have. A simple meal of salted meat, hard bread, and a prayer for survival. Still, there's something undeniably powerful about the moment. It's a reminder that despite the hardships, you're here, you've survived this far, and you're in this together. Historians debate whether the Pilgrims truly celebrated New Year's the way we think of it today, with festivities and joy. Some believe the day was spent in prayer and reflection, a somber acknowledgement of the struggles ahead. Others think it was a mixture of both, a humble celebration of the small victories that helped the Pilgrims endure the first few weeks. Either way, there's a sense of unity in the air. Despite the overwhelming challenges, there's a quiet, collective resolve. The Pilgrims are here, and nothing can take away the fact that they've made it this far. As the days continue, you start to notice something strange about the way time passes. In England, New Year's was something of a social event, a time for gatherings and festivities. But here, it feels as though time has slowed down, almost as if the land itself is stretching out the moments, testing your patience. The cold air nips at your skin, and the sky is overcast more often than not. It's easy to forget what warmth feels like, but in the quiet moments, you remind yourself that this is temporary. The struggles you're facing now will eventually lead to something better. For now, though, the harsh reality remains. The rations are almost gone, and the new world that seemed full of promise is revealing its challenges. The settlers are scattered throughout their makeshift shelters, waiting for the first signs of spring when they can begin planting. The ground is frozen, and there's no way to grow anything just yet. But you hold on to the hope that the Native Americans who inhabit the region might provide some guidance, some help. In those early days, you also hear whispers of the Wampanoag people. No one really knows much about them, but you've heard enough to know that they're not to be underestimated. There's a mix of fear and respect surrounding them. You're unsure of what to expect, but the need for allies is becoming more and more pressing. You've heard stories about their strength and their resourcefulness, and now the Pilgrims are praying for a chance to meet them and hopefully learn how to survive in this challenging land. The tension builds, but there's a strange sense of calm as well. The Pilgrims are beginning to realize that survival won't come from sheer force or isolation. It will come from collaboration, from understanding the land around them and forging new relationships. Perhaps it is this realization more than anything that helps the Pilgrims push forward, into the unknown, into the cold, into the new world. As winter settles deeper into the Plymouth colony, the Pilgrims are left to grapple with the harshness of their new home. The icy wind bites through their thin clothes, and each day feels like a test of endurance. The shelters they've built are rudimentary at best, providing little protection against the relentless cold. The food supplies brought over on the Mayflower are rapidly diminishing, and the reality is beginning to sink in. survival will be harder than anyone could have imagined. But as you settle into the daily grind of making do, a glimmer of hope appears on the horizon. You begin to hear stories of the Wampanoag, the Native American tribe that lives nearby. They are the very people you've heard whispered about with a mixture of awe and fear, their reputation as skilled hunters and fishermen preceding them. The Pilgrims are wary, unsure of what to expect from these strangers, but necessity has a way of changing things. You can feel it in the air, the tension between survival and suspicion. The Pilgrims must figure out how to navigate this delicate situation. One day the Wampanoag approached the colony. It's not with the hostility the Pilgrims expected, but rather with a sort of wary curiosity. You watch from a distance, your heart racing in your chest. It's difficult to predict what will happen next. The moment feels loaded with the weight of possibility, and the reality of your situation becomes clearer. Your survival depends in part on forming an alliance with these people who have been living on this land for generations. What follows is a series of exchanges, cautious but purposeful. The Wampanoag teach the Pilgrims how to fish and hunt in the area, sharing their knowledge of the land and its resources. They show you how to plant corn, beans, and squash, teaching you to create mounds of soil to protect crops from the cold. It's a difficult, slow process, but in these early interactions a bond begins to form, a partnership based on survival. The Pilgrims learn that there is much to gain from the Wampanoag, who have an intimate knowledge of the land and its rhythms. Historians still debate how much trust there was between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag during those early encounters. Some believe it was purely a matter of mutual necessity, both groups recognizing that their survival was intertwined. Others argue that the relationship was more complex, built on diplomacy and long-standing tensions. The truth is, it's difficult to say exactly how things unfolded, but one thing is clear. Without the help of the Wampanoag, the Pilgrims' chances of survival would have been far slimmer. As the days turn into weeks, the Pilgrims begin to recover, albeit slowly. The knowledge imparted by the Wampanoag begins to pay off, and the settlers start to plant their crops with greater confidence. You find yourself planting corn with a new sense of hope, knowing that these first efforts could mean the difference between life and death. But it's not all smooth sailing. Despite the early help, the Pilgrims face countless challenges. The harsh winter has taken a toll, and many settlers are still weak from the journey. There's still a deep fear of disease, and even with the knowledge gained from the Wampanoag, it feels like there are so many unknowns. Will the crops grow? Will the food last? The questions hang heavy in the air. Still, there's something powerful about the fact that you're here. You and your fellow Pilgrims have made it this far. The Mayflower might be long gone, but its legacy lives on in the land you've begun to call home. You've survived the worst of the Atlantic crossing, the bitter winter, and now, slowly, you begin to see the first signs of spring. The trees are starting to bud, the air feels warmer, and the soil, though still hard, holds the promise of growth. Historians often reflect on the role the Wampanoag played in this fragile beginning, emphasizing how their help was essential not only for physical survival but for the Pilgrims' mental resilience. In those early months, it wasn't just about learning how to grow food or build shelters. It was about learning how to live in harmony with a new world, one that was foreign and unpredictable. And as you stand in the fields, the sense of possibility that comes with each sprouting seed is enough to make you believe that, maybe, just maybe, this new world will be a place where you can thrive. As spring begins to stretch its fingers across the landscape, you can't help but feel a renewed sense of hope in your heart. The land, which only months ago seemed so unforgiving, now feels more inviting. The harsh winter has receded, leaving behind muddy earth and the promise of a new season. The corn you planted with the Wampanoag's guidance begins to sprout, though it's still far too early to tell how well it will grow. But for the first time since you set foot on Plymouth's rocky shores, you feel a tiny flicker of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, the colony will make it. The Wampanoag continue to offer their help, teaching you not only how to grow crops but also how to hunt and fish in this strange new world. The rivers teem with fish and the woods hide deer and wild turkeys. The sounds of nature, which once seemed so foreign to you, now fill your ears like an old, familiar song. Every successful hunt and each fish caught is a small victory, proof that survival in this new land is possible. But with each passing day, the reality of what it means to live here sets in even more. As the Pilgrims work side by side with the Wampanoag, it becomes increasingly clear that the relationship between the two groups is about more than just survival. It's about understanding, cooperation, and the complex interplay of two very different worlds. While the Pilgrims bring with them a strong sense of religious devotion and a desire for independence, the Wampanoag have lived on this land for generations, developing a profound understanding of nature's rhythms and the land's cycles. It's an unlikely partnership, but it works. Slowly you begin to see the colony take shape. More settlers arrive, their faces weathered by the journey but full of determination. The settlement is small but growing, and the community is beginning to feel more like a home, even if it's a far cry from the one you left behind in England. The Pilgrims' first winter was harsh, but this spring marks a turning point, a chance to rebuild and fortify what you've started. However, there's still a long way to go. Even though you've learned to fish, hunt, and plant crops, the land remains unpredictable. The weather, for example, can turn on a dime. Just when you think things are going smoothly, a sudden storm can ruin your crops or flood your shelter. You've learned to be resourceful, but it feels like you're always playing catch-up, always at the mercy of forces you can't control. And yet, you press on, fueled by the quiet but steadfast determination that's become the hallmark of your journey. And then there's the looming presence of the Native American tribes surrounding your colony. You've formed an alliance with the Wampanoag, but there are others in the area whose intentions are far less certain. The history of Native American relations with European settlers is complex, and historians still argue about the motives behind the early interactions. Were the Pilgrims truly welcomed, or did the Wampanoag have ulterior motives? Did other tribes see the Pilgrims as a threat or as potential allies? These are questions that still spark debate today, but in the present moment, you can only focus on surviving, making allies where you can, and learning from the land and its people. At night, when the work is done and you finally have a moment to rest, the vastness of this new world presses in on you. You stare up at the stars, which seem to shine brighter here than they ever did back home. There's something soothing about the way they twinkle above, far away yet close enough to make you feel small in the grand scheme of things. The silence of the night is a far cry from the hustle and bustle of the English countryside, and you find comfort in it. It's a new rhythm of life, a slower one where every action feels more deliberate, more intentional. As the days grow longer and the crops you've planted begin to show promise, you start to think about what the future holds. The Pilgrims came to this land seeking freedom, but what they found was a series of challenges that required more than just religious devotion. It required cooperation, adaptability, and a deep respect for the land and the people who had lived here long before you. The New World, in all its wild, untamed beauty, is not something that can be conquered. It must be understood, worked with, and respected. The partnership between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag continues to evolve, and while the future remains uncertain, you realize that you are no longer just surviving. You are learning how to live here, how to make this place your home. There's still much to be done, but for the first time, you feel like you might just have the tools to build something lasting. As spring gives way to summer, the colony begins to breathe a little easier. The crops that once seemed fragile and uncertain are now pushing up through the soil with greater strength, the seeds of survival slowly transforming into tangible promise. You watch the corn grow taller, the beans wrapping themselves around their vines, and the squash begin to spread across the fields like green blankets. There's a sense of cautious optimism in the air, tempered by the understanding that the work is far from over. But for now, the earth seems to be cooperating, and that's a small victory in itself. The Wampanoag continue to help, offering guidance on the best techniques for planting and harvesting in the unfamiliar terrain. Their role in the colony's survival becomes even more crucial as the Pilgrims begin to realize that farming here isn't as simple as it seemed in England. The soil, while rich in some areas, is often difficult to work with, and the climate is unpredictable. One bad storm could wash away months of hard work. Still, the Wampanoag share their expertise freely, teaching you how to rotate crops, how to build better fences to protect your fields from wild animals, and how to store your food for the coming months. Historians often highlight how important this relationship was, not just in terms of physical survival, but in shaping the cultural exchange between the two groups. While much of the focus is on the Pilgrims' religious journey, the cooperation with the Wampanoag shows that the New World was more than just a blank slate for European settlers to impose their ways upon. It was a land of knowledge and wisdom that had been developed over generations, and without the input of the Native Americans, the Pilgrims would have struggled to thrive. But the future remains uncertain. The Pilgrims are still a small, fragile community, and outside Plymouth, the wilderness remains a daunting force. The trees seem to stretch endlessly in every direction, the wilderness both inviting and threatening. The thought of facing this vast, untamed land without the support of the Wampanoag weighs heavily on your mind. There's a quiet understanding among the Pilgrims that their survival is linked to their ability to adapt, both to the land and to the people who have lived here long before they arrived. As the days grow longer and the weather becomes more temperate, the first real harvest begins to take shape. The fields are full of promise, and the settlers begin to feel the first true sense of abundance. But even as the crops grow, there's a deep awareness that the colony is still fragile. The settlement is small, its borders undefined, and while the Pilgrims are learning how to make the land work for them, there's no guarantee that the Wampanoag, or any other tribe, will always be there to help. With the harvest approaching, the Pilgrims begin to prepare for what will be a turning point in their journey: Thanksgiving. It wasn't a grand event, not by modern standards, but it was a moment of celebration, a chance to give thanks for the crops that had finally begun to grow, and for the help they'd received from the Wampanoag. It's an understated beginning to a tradition that would grow into something much larger, but for the Pilgrims, it was a recognition that, against the odds, they had made it through their first year in the New World. That first Thanksgiving wasn't the elaborate feast many imagine today. It was more of a communal meal, simple and humble, with food that came from the land and the sea. The Pilgrims likely ate venison, fowl, fish, corn, beans, squash, and berries, all prepared with the same resourcefulness they had learned from the Wampanoag. Historians often debate whether the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag truly sat down together for the first Thanksgiving, or whether it was a more informal gathering. Some suggest that the two groups exchanged gifts and shared what they had harvested, while others believe that the meal was shared among the Pilgrims themselves, with the Wampanoag only stopping by to offer assistance in the form of food or supplies. But what stands out the most about this early Thanksgiving is the sense of gratitude. It wasn't a day of overindulgence or revelry, it was a quiet acknowledgement that survival was no longer a certainty. The Pilgrims knew that they had to keep working, keep learning, and keep cooperating with the land and with each other. There was no room for complacency, but there was room for hope. As the meal ends and the evening settles in, you take a moment to step outside. The sky is clear, the stars twinkling above in their familiar pattern, reminding you of the vastness of the world beyond Plymouth. There's no turning back, but somehow you feel a sense of peace. The hard work, the sacrifices, the uncertainty, they've all led to this moment where, for the first time since leaving England, you can look at the world around you and say, "We've made it." It's not perfect, but it's real. And in this strange, untamed land, that's all you can ask for. As you reflect on the first Thanksgiving and the community you've built in Plymouth, the months continue to pass, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. The harshness of the first winter still lingers in your memories, but now, as the leaves turn golden and the air grows crisp with the onset of autumn, the colony feels more solid, more established. The crops have been harvested, the homes are more secure, and the people, although still a small group, seem to be adjusting to life in the new world. The constant pressure of survival has not abated, but there's a palpable shift. Now it's more about building a future than just holding on. One thing that stands out is the role women have played in this slow but steady progress. In the early days of the colony, it wasn't just the men who did the heavy lifting, despite what some historical accounts might suggest. Women, too, were central to the success of Plymouth. Their work wasn't just in the kitchen or caring for the children, it extended to the fields, the construction of homes, and the social fabric that held the colony together. Without the strength and resilience of the women, Plymouth's first years would have been far more difficult. Historians still argue over the specifics of the roles women played in the early settlements. Some suggest that women were often relegated to the domestic sphere, while others argue that they were critical to the colony's survival in every way, from managing the household to leading small groups of settlers in daily tasks. What is clear, however, is that the contributions of women were vital. They nurtured the next generation, maintained the family structures, and worked alongside the men to create something sustainable in a place that had, at first, seemed impossibly hostile. The more you look around Plymouth, the more you realize that this is not just a colony of religious zealots. It's a community made up of families, each person contributing to the larger goal. Yes, the Pilgrims came for religious freedom, but now, in this new land, survival has become a shared responsibility. The men, the women, and even the children are all part of this new society. The women have earned their place in Plymouth's history, and while their stories are often overlooked in the grand narrative, they are as integral to the colony's success as anyone else. But despite the progress, there's still the ever-present shadow of the unknown. The survival of Plymouth is no certainty, and while the Pilgrims have made incredible strides in their first year, the future remains precarious. The Wampanoag, who have been such invaluable allies, still represent an unknown factor in the mix. Trust has been built between the groups, but alliances can shift quickly, and the Pilgrims know they cannot afford to take the Wampanoag's help for granted. Every day, as you wake to the sounds of the morning birds and the rush of the wind through the trees, you're reminded that survival in the new world requires more than just hard work. It requires constant vigilance, adaptability, and a willingness to face whatever comes next. As you make your way through the fields, harvesting the last of the crops before the first frost arrives, you begin to think more about the future. The Pilgrims have succeeded where many others would have failed. You've made it through the worst of the trials that life in the new world can throw at you. But what about next year? The land may be yielding crops now, but can it be counted on again? The dangers of the wilderness are still present, lurking in the shadows of the forest. The thought of what lies beyond the immediate future is daunting, but there's a flicker of something else: hope. Historians have long debated the significance of the Pilgrims' survival in Plymouth, and whether their success was a stroke of luck or the result of careful planning and cooperation. There's no single answer, of course. But one thing is certain: the story of the Pilgrims is about more than just survival. It's about learning to thrive in the face of adversity, about building a new society out of the ruins of the old, and about recognizing the value in working together for a common cause. The days are shorter now, the evenings cooler. But as you sit by the fire at night, surrounded by your fellow settlers, there's a warmth in the air that doesn't just come from the flames. It's the warmth of a community that has found its footing, a group of people who have learned to live together, to support each other, and to look forward to a future that is uncertain but full of potential. As the season changes, so too does your perspective. The new world may have been an uncertain, frightening place when you first arrived, but now it's starting to feel like home. The work isn't done and the journey is far from over, but for the first time since setting foot on Plymouth's shores, you feel a sense of pride in what you and your fellow Pilgrims have accomplished. This place, this land, is your home now. It's a home that you've worked for, fought for, and slowly but surely, it's becoming a place where you can truly thrive. With the harvest safely gathered and the first true winter behind you, a sense of calm begins to settle over Plymouth. The initial hardships have not been forgotten, but they have become part of the shared experience that binds everyone together. The days are still long and the work never stops, but there's a rhythm to it now, a pattern that feels more like home than survival. The quiet of the new world, the simple yet satisfying tasks of farming, hunting, and building, have slowly become the heartbeat of Plymouth. But with each passing day, there's also the ever-present question of what's next. The Pilgrims are no longer just trying to survive, they're trying to build something lasting. The colony is growing, albeit slowly, and with that growth comes new challenges. The settlers are learning to adapt to the land, to work with it rather than against it, and to establish a way of life that is sustainable. There's no blueprint for what they're doing, no guidebook for creating a new society in a foreign land. Everything is trial and error, and as the seasons pass, the lessons learned seem to stack up, one after another. The Wampanoag continue to play a crucial role in the Pilgrims' success. Their knowledge of the land is invaluable, and their assistance in hunting, farming, and trading has ensured the survival of Plymouth. But even as relationships between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag continue to strengthen, you can't help but feel a growing unease. Historians often reflect on the delicate nature of these early alliances. While the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag worked together out of necessity, the dynamics of colonialism were always shifting, and it's hard to imagine a future where things stay as peaceful as they are now. Still, for the time being, the cooperation between the two groups remains essential. The Wampanoag teach the Pilgrims more about their traditional methods of hunting, fishing, and food preservation. You're learning not just how to survive but how to thrive. The Pilgrims begin to see the wisdom in the ways of the Wampanoag, and the Wampanoag begin to recognize the Pilgrims' resilience, their ability to adapt and persevere. It's a strange partnership, but it works, at least for now. But as the seasons change again, the need to establish Plymouth as a permanent settlement becomes ever clearer. The Pilgrims have made it through their first year, but they are still a fragile group. They need to think beyond the immediate concerns of food and shelter and start considering what it will take to create a lasting colony. Will they continue to rely on the Wampanoag for help, or will they strike out on their own? The decisions made in these early days will shape the future of Plymouth, and, in many ways, the future of the New World itself. You spend your days working alongside the settlers, putting in the effort to secure the future of this fledgling community. There's always something to be done, from fixing homes and repairing tools to planting the next crop and ensuring the supply of food. The settlers are resourceful, but they are still learning how to make this land their own. The soil is stubborn, the weather unpredictable, and the constant threat of disease looms over everything. But there's a quiet pride in the work. Every seed planted, every house built, every new task learned is another step toward creating a future. As the days grow colder once again, the first real test of Plymouth's endurance begins. The weather takes a turn for the worse, and the harsh winter you feared begins to settle in. But unlike the previous winter, this one feels different. You are no longer a group of strangers huddling together for warmth. You are a community, bound together by the shared effort of survival. And this time you are better prepared. The homes are sturdier, the food supplies more secure, and the settlers are more resilient. There's a quiet sense of confidence now, a belief that Plymouth can survive, not just for one more year but for many years to come. Historians often marvel at how the Pilgrims were able to persevere through such extreme conditions. Their story is one of incredible resilience, yes, but it's also a story of adaptation. The Pilgrims didn't just come to the New World with an idea of how things should be. They came with a willingness to learn, to listen, and to change in the face of adversity. They learned to work with the land, to collaborate with the Wampanoag, and to find ways to make the New World their own. As winter settles in, you feel a quiet sense of gratitude for the progress you've made. It's not perfect, and it never will be. There are still challenges ahead, still struggles to face. But for the first time, the future doesn't feel so uncertain. Plymouth is no longer just a collection of people huddling together on the edge of the world. It's a community with the potential to grow, to thrive, and to leave a legacy for those who will come after. And in the stillness of the winter evening, as you sit by the fire with your fellow settlers, You can't help but wonder what the future will hold. The land is vast and the possibilities are endless. You have come so far in such a short time, and while the road ahead is sure to be difficult, you have something that you didn't have when you first set foot on Plymouth's shores: hope. The winter months stretch on, and the winds whip through the colony with a vengeance. But despite the cold, there's a sense of stability now, a rhythm that has taken hold in Plymouth. The fires crackle more reliably in the hearths, the fields have begun to bear fruit, and there is a growing sense that the Pilgrims are no longer just surviving, they are building something that will last. Even the days of uncertainty when you first landed seem like a distant memory, replaced by a stronger, more resilient community. But the challenges are far from over. The colony's population continues to grow, and the need for new settlers, more supplies, and better infrastructure becomes pressing. You start to realize that it's not enough to just get by. You need to establish systems, governance, and a way to organize the community as it expands. The Pilgrims have learned how to plant crops and build homes, but now they must learn how to build a society. The Mayflower Compact, signed before the Pilgrims even left the ship, now takes on new importance. Historians still debate the full significance of the document, with some claiming it was one of the earliest forms of democratic governance in the New World, while others believe it was more of a temporary measure to ensure peace and order in the colony. Regardless of the debate, the compact was a social contract, an agreement that every settler would abide by the laws and regulations set forth for the good of the colony. It's an agreement that provides structure and stability in a time when both are still fragile. As the community grows, the question of governance becomes more complex. The Pilgrims have strong religious convictions, but the colony also includes people of various backgrounds, some of whom are not as strictly religious. This diversity begins to present new challenges. How do you govern a community made up of so many different beliefs and perspectives? How do you maintain order when the very thing that brought you together, religious freedom, can sometimes lead to disagreements over the role of religion in daily life? For the time being, the Pilgrims continue to rely on their leaders, their elders and ministers, who have been instrumental in organizing the colony from the very beginning. These leaders, while not always perfect, have helped maintain a sense of order, guiding the settlers through both practical matters and religious needs. But as time goes on, it becomes clear that the colony will need more formal leadership. New structures will need to be built, new laws written, and new systems of organization put in place. Despite these challenges, there is an undeniable sense of forward momentum. The Pilgrims have learned how to adapt to this new world in ways they couldn't have imagined when they first set foot on Plymouth's rocky shores. There is now a sense of community that binds everyone together. Whether you are working in the fields, helping to build a new house, or simply preparing for the next season, the Pilgrims have become a unit, a living, breathing community that is evolving and shaping its future with each passing day. As you walk through Plymouth on any given day, the landscape has begun to change. The homes are sturdier, the fields more plentiful, and the town center is becoming a place for community gatherings. There's a quiet energy in the air, a collective realization that this colony is no longer a fragile experiment. It's a living, thriving settlement, and it's starting to feel like home. Historians often refer to this period as the quiet foundation of Plymouth, where the groundwork for what would become the United States was laid. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic, it was just hard work, day by day, season by season. The Pilgrims were no longer just surviving, they were growing, establishing roots, and figuring out how to live in this new world. Their story is about more than just a religious quest or a struggle for survival. It's about the creation of something lasting, something built on cooperation, faith, and hard-earned knowledge. Now, as you stand in the midst of Plymouth, with the promise of the future ahead of you, there's a deep sense of accomplishment. You know that this is only the beginning. The road ahead will be difficult, filled with uncertainty and obstacles, but for the first time you feel ready. The colony may be small, but it's alive with possibility. And in the stillness of the evening, when the winds have died down and the fires crackle softly, You allow yourself to dream about the future of Plymouth. It's a future that, despite the odds, you now believe in. A future built by your hands, your faith, and the community that has grown around you. As the months slip into the quiet rhythm of life, the once raw edges of Plymouth's existence begin to smooth out. The land, now worked and known by the Pilgrims, has started to offer its bounty in earnest. The crops are thriving, the shelters are more secure, and the early challenges of survival feel somewhat distant, though never forgotten. The constant fear of sickness and famine that gripped the settlers at the beginning has gradually given way to the understanding that, while survival is still not guaranteed, the community has managed to carve a niche for itself in this new land. One of the most important aspects of Plymouth's survival is the way in which the Pilgrims have come to understand their relationship with the land. This isn't just about planting seeds and hoping for crops. It's about respecting the land, working with it, and adapting to the cycles of nature in ways that the Pilgrims had never imagined back in England. The Wampanoag's knowledge of the local ecosystem has been invaluable, but it's not just about how to grow crops. It's about understanding how to read the land signs, how to predict weather patterns, and how to manage resources sustainably. The lessons are subtle but vital, and the Pilgrims have learned quickly that the land is as much a partner in their survival as any of the people in the colony. The sense of cooperation between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag, which began out of necessity, has now evolved into something more. While the Pilgrims are still deeply religious, they have come to realize that survival in the New World requires a blend of pragmatism and respect for the traditions of those who have lived on this land far longer than they have. The relationship is not without its complexities, but for the time being, it's built on mutual respect and shared knowledge. There's an understanding that both groups need each other to thrive, and that understanding is woven into the fabric of everyday life in Plymouth. But there's a deeper question that begins to stir within you as the colony grows. What happens when the Pilgrims' vision for this new world begins to clash with the realities of living on this land? What happens when the promise of religious freedom, the ideal that brought you here, begins to shift into something else entirely? As Plymouth expands and more settlers arrive, new tensions begin to emerge. The Pilgrims, who once sought only a peaceful haven, now find themselves at the crossroads of something bigger, a struggle over land, resources, and the very future of the colony. There's an undeniable shift that begins to take place among the settlers. The once idealistic pursuit of religious freedom is still important, but now there's also a drive for growth and prosperity, for a future that might go beyond just survival. It's a subtle change, one that doesn't happen overnight, but it's there. The early years of Plymouth were focused on the basics: food, shelter, and cooperation. But as the colony grows, so too do the aspirations of those who have come to this land. The hope for a better life has evolved into a vision of building a lasting society, one that can provide for not just the Pilgrims but future generations. Historians debate the exact moment when the Pilgrims began to transition from simple settlers to founders of a new society. Some argue that it was the signing of the Mayflower Compact. Others say it was during the first successful harvest. But whatever the moment was, there's no denying that the Pilgrims' journey had far-reaching implications. What started as a religious mission had begun to morph into a political, economic, and cultural foundation for a new way of life. And with that transformation comes the inevitable tensions, conflicts, and decisions that will shape the future of Plymouth. As you look around at the colony, you realize how far you've come since those early days on the Mayflower. The colony isn't perfect, and there are still many obstacles ahead, but it's no longer a fragile, uncertain experiment. Plymouth has become a place where people can build something from the ground up, a place where new ideas are being forged daily. The Pilgrims may have come seeking religious freedom, but what they're building now is something far more complex. A community that blends faith, cooperation, and the pragmatism of survival. And that, more than anything, is what makes Plymouth unique. The quiet moments of reflection are interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind you. Another settler, heading toward the town square, carrying news or supplies. You've learned that in this place life never stops. There's always something to be done, always something to build. But in the silence of the evening, as the last rays of sunlight flicker through the trees, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You've come a long way from that first harrowing winter. Plymouth is no longer a distant dream. It's becoming a reality, and in that reality, you can see the outlines of a new world slowly taking shape. The sun rises over Plymouth, casting a soft golden light over the fields and homes that now dot the landscape. The once uncertain settlement has transformed into a bustling, if still fragile, community. You walk through the colony and the air feels different now, brighter, warmer, as though it's not just the physical landscape that has changed, but the spirit of the settlers as well. The first few years were a test of endurance and resilience, but now the Pilgrims are beginning to see the fruits of their labor. They've made it through the hardest part, and while there are still challenges ahead, the road feels less daunting. The colony is growing. More ships arrive, bringing new settlers, new ideas, and more opportunities. The land that once seemed barren and inhospitable now feels full of potential. The crops are abundant, and the colony is beginning to trade with other settlements and even with Native American tribes farther afield. There is a sense of movement, of progress, that was absent in the early years when survival was all that mattered. You pause for a moment to look out over the fields. The corn, beans, and squash grow in neat rows, the early signs of a prosperous harvest. The land, which once seemed like an enemy, now feels like a partner, one that has been tamed with patience, care, and knowledge. The Wampanoag, who have been your teachers and partners, continue to guide the Pilgrims in ways you never thought possible. Their teachings about agriculture, hunting, and fishing have been invaluable, and it's clear that their knowledge has allowed the colony to thrive in ways that would have been impossible on its own. Yet, as the seasons change, so do the dynamics of Plymouth. The population grows, and with that growth comes the inevitable complexity of managing a larger, more diverse group. The ideals that brought the Pilgrims to this new land, religious freedom, self-governance, and a fresh start, are now challenged by the realities of living in a colony. The Mayflower Compact, once a guiding document, becomes the foundation upon which more formal systems of government begin to take shape. The Pilgrims, once united in their religious vision, now find themselves navigating the challenges of leadership and governance. The question that begins to arise among the settlers is no longer simply about survival. It's about what kind of society the Pilgrims want to build. How will they govern themselves? How will they balance their religious beliefs with the realities of a growing and diverse colony? And perhaps most importantly, how will they handle the relationships with the Native American tribes who live nearby? Historians often point to this period as a time of transformation for the Pilgrims. What began as a religious mission has evolved into something far more complicated. It's no longer just about religious freedom, it's about establishing a society that can endure, a society that balances the values of the Pilgrims with the practicalities of living in the New World. The Pilgrims begin to realize that their survival is no longer dependent solely on their ability to adapt to the land. It's now about the ability to adapt to each other, to govern themselves, and to navigate the complexities of the relationships they've forged with the Wampanoag and other tribes. As the colony continues to grow and mature, the Pilgrims find themselves confronting the contradictions between their ideals and the realities of colonialism. While the Pilgrims came to this land seeking freedom, they must now figure out what kind of freedom they are really creating. The questions are complex and uncomfortable, and the answers are not always clear. The Pilgrim's journey is not just one of religious freedom, it is also a journey of understanding what it means to build a society in a new land, one that is defined by cooperation, adaptation, and constant negotiation. But as you stand in the fields, watching the sun dip below the horizon, you realize something important. The Pilgrim's story isn't just about the struggle to survive, it's about the desire to create something lasting. They didn't come to the New World just to exist. They came to build a future, to forge a new way of life that reflected their values and beliefs. And while that future is uncertain, it is also full of possibility. The colony may still be small, and the challenges may still be many, But there is a sense that Plymouth has found its footing, that it is now a place where the Pilgrims' dreams can grow, evolve, and take root. The New World is still wild and untamed, and there are many obstacles yet to overcome. But for now, the Pilgrims stand together, united by their shared history, their shared struggles, and their shared hope for the future. And as the stars appear in the sky, bright against the backdrop of the vast, silent wilderness, you can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, Plymouth is more than just a place on a map. It's a living testament to the spirit of those who came before, a place where the past and the future meet, where survival and hope intertwine, and where, against all odds, the Pilgrims have found a way to make a new life.